Grüß willkommen in einem Fragens-video, or welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 18 of my organisational series. In this case I'll be attempting to provide an overview of the structure and development of the German Panzer division in World War II. I have created earlier videos on the structure of German and Russian infantry divisions, but I felt that that level of detail, or the detail I provided, was overkill. What I really wanted to do was provide an overview of the structure of the divisions and how they changed during the war. Part of this would also include providing an idea of how the combat effectiveness of the various sub-formations changed as well. Apart from the two very detailed videos I created on the German and Russian infantry divisions, I also created a set of much simpler videos showing a very basic view of how the various battalion strengths and numbers changed in most of the armies involved in World War II. This approach was perhaps too simple for my objectives, so this video is an attempt to create something in between, but specifically for just the German Panzer divisions. I will not provide hyper detail of each individual divisions, because if I did so, this video would be about 4 hours in length. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on a typical division, at least according to official structures. Obviously, such a division in the field and in combat would degrade rapidly, so this needs to be considered when I provide my overviews. In some cases, I will be using the actual strength of the division during a particular date on a particular front line. The main focus, or atomic formation, is the battalion. So once I go down to company level, the TO&E would be probably too complex for the purpose of this video, so I'm not going to do that. The battalion is my lowest level formation. I may come back and break down the battalions to company level, but not in this video. Let us now look at a typical division in a specific period. In this case, the 1st Panzer Division on the 3rd of September 1939. The regiment or equivalent level formations are clearly listed, as you can see here. The number of each regiment is included, as well as its combat strength. I'll discuss how I derive the combat strength later. The next level of formation is the battalion or equivalent. The number of each battalion is included, in this case 3 Panzer battalions. Moving to the right, we come to the battalion's combat strength, in this case 773 or 773 points, followed by a battalion code, and finally combat values, using a set of rules based on SPI Modern Battles board game. The values will generally, or these values will generally be ignored in the video as it's used for a set of figure gaming rules, but the other values will be used as they provide an idea of the battalion type and strength. In front of many of the formation level, in this case the battalion name, is a mobility symbol, which could be motorised, horse, cycle, armoured, and so on. If there's no symbol, it's basically going to be on foot. In some battalion formation names, an idea of the weapon within is provided. In this case, this is a battalion which consists of 10.5 centimetre howitzers. Above this entry, about 4, you will see a 3.7 G symbol, which is a 3.7 centimetre gun, which in this case is an anti-tank gun. Now let's drill down into combat strengths or combat values. This is a points value, or the points value of that formation, using a rather old set of figure gaming rules, in this case Corps Commander. I could have used any set of rules, and while the results would vary a little bit, I found they are all generally similar. Of course, how close these points values reflect reality is another issue, which in this video I will not be covering. In the point system, no provision for a formation's morale or quality is taken into account. Thus, a German 1941 Panzer battalion would have a significant advantage over a Soviet tank battalion in 1941 due to quality. But trying to factor those subjective issues in is so difficult, it would make my analysis comparatively useless because it would be basically my gut feel. Viewers will need to take quality and morale factors into account if they wish to compare the strength of one nationality against another. That will not be covered in this video. Even within the same nationalities, the troop qualities of a 1941 Panzer battalion would be higher than a 1939 or 1945 Panzer battalion. Viewers will need to make their own subjective call if they wish to perform such a chronological comparison. Let's now get down into the meat of the video. Let's move into the analysis portion, starting with 1939 and specifically the German invasion of Poland. This shows a typical Panzer division, in this case specifically the 1st Panzer Division on the 3rd of September 1939. The division consists of 1 artillery regiment, 1 motorised infantry regiment and 2 Panzer regiments. There is a brigade structure built into this, but it was quickly found to be of minimal use, so I've not included it in my chart. Supporting these regiments were a pioneer, motorcycle, reconnaissance and anti-tank battalions, all under divisional control. Surprisingly, the Panzer regiment's strength is less than that of the infantry regiment, which is mainly due to the use of Panzer I and Panzer II tanks. These vehicles were not what I would call powerful vehicles, even by the standard of the period. The artillery regiment, which was fully motorised, that is, towed by trucks, consisted of 3 light and 1 medium artillery battalions. The motorised infantry regiment, which were troops that were mounted in soft-skin vehicles, consisted of 3 motorised infantry battalions. Finally, we come to the sexy part of the division. Each of the 2 Panzer regiments consisted of 3 Panzer battalions each. The Panzer Division was not the only Panzer division in the German army. The other armoured division in the German army, in 1939 at least, were the Light Division, which did vary a great deal. In this case, I'll be looking at the 1st Light Division. The divisional assets consisted of a pioneer battalion and anti-tank battalion. The reconnaissance regiment was unique to the light divisions, and this consisted of a motorcycle and armoured car battalion, with regimental support formations. The artillery regiment only consisted of 3 light howitzer battalions, all towed by motor vehicles. There was no medium artillery battalion in the light division. The motorised infantry regiments in the light division were similar to the Panzer division and consisted of 3 motorised infantry battalions. Finally, we come to the Panzers. In this case, the 2 Panzer regiments only consisted of 2 Panzer battalions each. Let us now move to 1940, specifically the German invasion of France and the Low Countries. The Germans converted their light divisions into Panzer divisions, so we only have 1 divisional structure to deal with in 1940. However, almost every Panzer division was different in some way. The most common was related to equipment, such as the tanks used, but there was some difference with the structure of the motorised infantry as well. In this comparison, I'll be using the 3rd Panzer Division as my typical formation for 1940. The divisional support elements remained the same, although there was some minor changes in the motorcycle battalion, the details of which are not included here, but you can see by looking at the strengths or the point strength value, which has changed. The Panzer Artillery Regiment remained unchanged. As with the artillery, the motorised infantry remained unchanged, although there were 4 versions of this regiment. Each had some minor tweaks or differences in them, which you can't really see by looking at this particular structure chart that you see here. In theory, the Panzer regiment did not change. However, many divisions possessed different tanks, which did affect their combat capability. The tanks did improve. Overall, we can say the Panzer Division did not experience much change between the Polish and French campaign in terms of structure and also in terms of equipment. When we move to 1941, I'm breaking it up into 2 parts, one covering the African campaign and the other the Russian campaign. The Germans recreated their light divisional structure when they sent forces to assist Italy in Libya, creating the 5th Light Division, which we'll look at in more detail. One interesting aspect of the 5th Light Division was the infantry consisted of motorcycle mounted troops. While these formations were often found at battalion strength in a reconnaissance role within a standard Panzer division, here we have an entire regiment of this troop type. The other interesting feature was the Panzer Artillery Regiment only consisted of a single battalion of truck-towed 10.5cm howitzers. By March, the structure of the division had changed, mainly due to what was arriving in Africa. One interesting point was the addition of an early tank destroyer battalion. This did exist in 1940, or at least one did, and did also exist in 1941 in Russia, but they were mainly held at corps level, not at divisional level. Another interesting point is the addition of a mixed flak battalion, which would normally only be held at corps or army level. The 2 cm armed flak battalion was commonly attached to a division, but the mixed battalions were normally not. I expect, due to the ad hoc nature of the campaign, formations were thrown together as required. As this formation represents a fringe case, I will not be focusing on the Panzer division sent to Africa in any detail, but will provide a quick overview for those interested when something interesting pops up. Let's now move to 1941, the Russian campaign. The Panzer divisions in Russia represent a better view of the standard structure and strength of an official and typical Panzer division. The Germans made a great deal of changes after the French campaign, which allowed them to increase the number of Panzer divisions. While this did, in theory, reduce the combat strength, in practice the changes resulted in a much better balanced formation. It could be argued the German Panzer division were tank-heavy in 1940, and in many cases failed to work together with their motorised infantry, at least the Panzer battalions failed to work correctly with their motorised infantry battalions. This caused significant tank losses at the start of the French campaign, and many of the changes were designed to ensure this did not occur. One point that I need to raise is the structure of the Panzer division did not match the way it operated, with the Panzer division often being divided up into 3 groups, which mixed battalions together between the regiments and even incorporated the divisional assets in order to achieve specific objectives. I'll be using the 4th Panzer Division as my typical structure for 1941 in Russia. The division support formations remained much the same, with minor changes in the motorcycle battalion and slightly more changes in the anti-tank battalion. In 1941, the biggest change was the addition of a flak battalion. The Panzer artillery regiments did not change in 1941, at least for Russia. One major change which occurred was the beefing up of the motorised infantry battalions, mainly adding regimental support formations. The other change was an increase in the number of motorised infantry regiments in the division from 1 to 2. When we moved to the Panzer regiment, the number of Panzer regiments dropped from 2 to 1, and the number of Panzer battalions in the regiments dropped from 3 to 2. On the other hand, due to superior tanks, the combat strength of the Panzer battalions actually increased, although the overall combat strength of all the tanks in the division did go down. The way the battalions were structured in combat varied as much as the number of Panzer divisions, but in one example, a Panzer battalion was allocated to each of the motorised infantry regiments, and in turn a motorised infantry battalion from each motorised infantry regiment was split off and joined up with a reconnaissance battalion and other formations such as the anti-tank battalion. This created 3 Kampfgruppen, or 3 groups, each of which was designed to meet a particular objective. While the battalions generally stayed together, they were paired up as required with whatever formation was required to meet the objective. This doctrine worked very well, and we can say the true Panzer division was probably first officially implemented in Russia in 1941, or perhaps the Balkans in the previous month. Unofficially, this flexibility did exist in 1940 as well, but it depended heavily on the commanders. Let's now look at the 2nd Panzer Division in October 1941. The structure of the division had not officially changed, but the divisional did differ a bit depending on the equipment within each individual division. In this case, the Panzer battalions were weaker than the 4th Panzer Division in June 1941. However, in this case, it was mainly due to losses. Losses had significantly reduced the official strength of the division further, almost across the board. The Germans did a good job repairing the tanks, and some new tanks were arriving from the west, although the numbers were trivial. In September, it was estimated the 2 centre Panzer groups had a tank strength of 71% of their official numbers. I would estimate a similar 29% attrition would have occurred with other vehicles and manpower. This reduction of non-tank strength is not reflected in this table, but the tank losses are. For 1942, let's now go back to Africa. In this case, we'll be looking at a correct Panzer division. In addition to the 5th Light, the Germans also sent the 15th Panzer Division to Africa. Like the 5th Light, it was ad hoc, but was closer to an official Panzer Division structure. However, in this video, I mainly want to look at the divisions in Russia and on the main Western Front. So, meanwhile, back in Russia, the Panzer divisions were evolving due to the harsh realities of warfare and a lack of equipment and manpower. From now on, I'll be providing the actual structures of example Panzer divisions rather than any official strengths, as the official strength rarely matched reality. Should be noted that the structure and strengths of the Panzer division were beginning to vary a great deal, so these structures no longer really represented the norm in any way, shape or form, unless there was some massive preparation for a major offensive. Let's start with the 11th Panzer Division, dated March 1942. This was beginning to diverge from the official structure. The motorcycle battalion was significantly beefed up in this division. The flak battalion was missing at divisional level, but was instead directly distributed to the regiments. The Panzer Artillery Battalion had not changed to any degree, but the lack of manpower resulted in a reduction of supporting formations and manpower within each battalion. The motorised infantry battalions experienced significant changes, with flak directly attached to the regiments and with one regiment having a half-track mounted battalion within it. In this case, the 110th Infantry Regiment consisted of 2 half-track mounted battalions, which was very unusual, and this structure did not remain for long as there was a lack of half-track and almost certainly did not apply to all the divisions, only some of them. Putting that aside, according to this strength metric, the resulting half-track mounted infantry battalion was very powerful. This was also due to the half-track supporting formations added to this battalion. Let's now come to the Panzer Regiment, which retained 2 Panzer battalions. However, battalion strength had risen significantly, in this case due to the delivery of better tanks and the retirement of the Panzer I and Panzer II tanks. Let's now move to the end of 1942, in this case the 12th of December, and let's cover the 11th Panzer Division. One formation which is now missing is the motorcycle battalion. Otherwise, the support formations remained much the same, apart from a number of adjustments, although some of the battalions did increase their combat strengths, mainly due to the arrival of new, better equipment. This is coming rather common, but the Panzer Artillery Regiment remains yet still the same. The motorised infantry regiments experienced yet more changes. In this case, each regiment consisted of 2 motorised and 1 half-track mounted infantry battalions each, at least for this Panzer division. While not a formal structure, this happened to be the structure for this division in 1942, and I suspect maybe a couple of other Panzer divisions, but that's about it. You'll probably notice that when you look at Niehorster, you see what a Panzer division looked like from 1942 onwards. It rarely followed the official structure. The Panzer regiments remained the same, although due to losses, the strengths of the battalion had suffered, as you can see here, even though the vehicle quality or strengths of the vehicles were improving. Let's now drill forward to 1943, although in this case I'll be starting with the Battle of Kursk, during which the Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions were generally up to strength. So we get an unusual situation here where the official strength kind of matches the reality. In fact, sometimes the reality was far in excess of the official formation strength. The Grossdeutschland Panzer Division, while not a Panzer Division, had a number of significantly powerful Panzer battalions attached to it, such as the Panther tank battalions. This Panzer Grenadier Division consisted, in addition of normal Panzer divisions, a tank destroyer battalion, a flank battalion, and an assault gun battalion, which we had not seen earlier in any of the divisional structures. The Grossdeutschland Panzer Grenadier Division was a very well-equipped division, so is in no way typical, but one change which occurred in the Panzer Artillery Regiment here was the addition of self-propelled howitzer battalions. This was going to become more and more common during 1943 and especially in 1944. The Panzer Grenadier Regiment was similar to the Panzer Grenadier Regiments in the 11th Panzer Division back in December 1942. 2 regiments consisting of 2 motorised and 1 half-track mounted Panzer Grenadier battalions each. The Großdeutschland Panzer Regiment was not typical for a Panzergrenadier division, and the addition of this formation is what makes this division closer to a Panzer division than a Panzergrenadier division. 2 battalions were equipped with Panzer IVs, one with Tiger tanks, and 2 attached Panzer Group battalions were equipped with Panther tanks. This was a very powerful Panzer regiment. A more typical 1943 Panzer division is the 12th Panzer Division. This TONE, dated August 1943, shows some interesting changes. The attached formations now include a flak battalion, possibly due to increased Soviet air power. The tank destroyer battalion was becoming standard, providing highly mobile anti-tank assets. Finally, the reconnaissance battalion was significantly beefed up. The Panzer artillery regiments had formed up into this structure, which included 1 light howitzer battalion towed by trucks, 1 medium howitzer battalion towed by trucks, and a mixed light-medium self-propelled howitzer battalion. As this new structure was official, due to the lack of half-tracks across the Eastern Front, only 1 regiment contained a half-track mounted infantry battalion. The other 3 motorised infantry battalions were all truck mounted. However, at least most of the Panzer divisions contained 1 half-track mounted infantry battalion. When we look at the Panzer regiments, while the number of tanks in the Panzer battalions had not changed much, the inclusion of yet more powerful tanks had resulted in the Panzer battalions increasing in strength. Let's now move to 1944. In many ways, 1944 represented the peak and the eventual decline of the Panzer divisions. Starting with the 12th Panzer Division in January 1944, we see little change in the divisional supporting formations. While the reconnaissance battalion was present in the late 1943 structure, I am surprised at how powerful this formation is, rivaling the Panzer IV armed Panzer battalions in strength, at least according to the point system that I'm using. This formation was a combined armed formation rather than all-tank formation, but it really had some punch. Now that we move to the Panzer Artillery Regiment, we see it's much the same as the previous one, no changes. When we move to the Panzer Grenadier Regiments, they also remained the same. Once again, assuming the point system does reflect combat capability, the half-track mounted Panzer Grenadier Battalion was also very powerful, rivaling the Panzer IV armed Panzer Battalion in terms of combat strength, although more defence rather than offence. By 1944, we are beginning to see a Panzer regiment which consisted of a Panzer IV armed Panzer Battalion and a Panther armed Panzer Battalion. While this structure did exist in late 1943 for some divisions, by 1944 it was becoming standard. The Panther-armed Panzer battalions were the most powerful battalion-sized formations of the Panzer divisions. After the massive losses in France and Russia in mid-1944, the Germans implemented a major change in the structure of their Panzer divisions. The supporting formations in principle remained the same, but several battalions experienced reductions in terms of manpower and equipment, which you can see in the reduction in strength of the reconnaissance and tank destroyer battalion. This is the beginning of the decline, that is after the breakout pursuit in the west, that is in France 44, and Operation Bagration. The German Panzer divisions were definitely moving into a decline stage. The Panzer artillery regiments remained much the same. The Panzer Grenadier regiment structure remained the same, but the strengths of most of the battalions had dropped. That is, manpower had dropped and equipment levels had dropped. When we move to the Panzer regiment, we see the same reduction in strength. So while the structure of the Panzer division remained much the same, this was a smaller and weaker formation. I assume this was due to the massive losses the Germans had suffered in the June to July-August period of 1944. If we look at the SS Panzer Division, we do not see the same reduction in combat strengths in the Panzer regiments, but the Panzer Grenadier and some of the battalions at division level were similar to regular army strengths and had reduced. The 1st SS Panzer Division did possess extra divisional level formations such as the assault gun battalions and flank battalions. This still remained a very powerful division right up until the end of 1944. Let's now move to 1945. The Germans did prepare a new 1945 structure, but this was never actually implemented. I will not cover this theoretical structure in much detail, but this formation was beginning to resemble the Russian tank brigades. The Panzer regiment now consisted of one Panzer battalion, which I must admit was powerful, supported by two motorised infantry battalions. The Panzer Grenadier Regiment, of which there were two, lacked half-tracks or armour, so may have been intended as defensive in nature. This structure indicated the previous system of forming ad hoc formations to meet a specific requirement was not a priority or was not able to be implemented anymore, and this is almost certainly due to a lack of experienced troops. I'm uncertain of the thought processes behind this formation, but the number of tanks had dramatically reduced. By looking at the structure of the German Panzer divisions between 1939 and 1944, you can see two basic development areas. The simplest change was based on equipment. As time progressed, the quality and effectiveness of the equipment increased, from the improvement in tanks to the addition of new armoured vehicles such as self-propelled howitzers, self-propelled mortars, AA, tank destroyers, assault guns and armoured personnel carriers. This is what gamers would consider as sexy changes, as these all result in nice armoured vehicles, which are very impressive to look at. The more interesting change is the changes in the structure of the divisions and how the divisions operated. It took a while to identify an ideal structure, and then the ideal structure, and then the way this structure should be used in action. In 1939, the Panzer battalions would operate, in some cases, independently with minimal consideration of the other arms. The exceptions were the divisions under the command of Guderian, which does indicate he understood the correct way of using the Panzer divisions. However, after heavy losses in some engagements in Poland and Belgium, the rest of the German commanders quickly realised this issue, and by 1941 had adopted a level of combined arms operation in all their Panzer divisions, which was unmatched until 1944. And so we come to an end of my video, in this case part 18 of my video series on the German Panzer divisions, with a focus on how the division had changed at battalion level between 1939 and 1945. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.